so every cycle, everybody's like, "Oh my God, is this it? Are they gonna, is it the fascist takeover? Is it?" And like every time they lose, but every time they're just a little bit closer. If you speak privately to sort of elite French people, they know this. Like they, in public, it's like, "Oh, we're gonna defend fascism, blah blah blah," and then you speak to them in private, and they're like, "Yeah, it's probably inevitable. We'll just have to prepare. We'll just have to live with it."
Before we dive into the discussion, a quick word from our sponsors. Today, I want to make a bit of a personal appeal to anyone working on a SaaS app or website. If you spend any time on the internet, you probably have interacted with chatbots in the bottom right corner of sites. Most are really annoying. AI is making them better. But still, I often just get really useless generic answers out of these and end up just wanting to talk to a real human. It felt to me like AI shouldn't just make chatbots marginally better at text responses, but that they should enable a new type of web assistant. Something that feels like you're talking to a human support agent who is co-browsing alongside you. CommandBar is building that user assistant. Companies embed it into their web app, mobile app, or website. And they get a fully generative chatbot that can give personalized responses that refer to a user's past chats, perform actions directly on behalf of the user, like looking up account info, and even start browsing alongside the user to show them how to do something, like a tour guide. It can also nudge users when they seem confused or frustrated. I love when I encounter CommandBar in websites. It's white labeled, but at this point I can tell right away. CommandBar already reaches more than 20 million end users with major customers like HashiCorp, Gusto, Freshworks, 6th Sense, and more. See for yourself at commandbar.com/MOZ or follow the link in the show notes.
Pascal, welcome to the podcast. Excited to chat about what the hell is going on.
Thank you. Excited to tell you a bunch of things about a bunch of political parties and politicians that none of your audience have heard of, and that all have names that sounds remarkably similar, which should make everything very easy to understand and follow.
Yeah, so before we get into what's happened exactly in France for people who have no idea, why don't you briefly give your sort of background as to why you know what's happening, and then we'll get into what's actually happening.
Okay, so I've been working as a journalist and a sort of political observer on both sides of the Atlantic for many, many years now. I know people in politics who have been texting me crazy things all day for a week. So I've got a pretty good vantage point on what's going on, but not pretty good. Better than most people, which is still bad because everything is so chaotic that I'm fairly sure that nobody understands what's going on except the guy at the NSA who's reading everybody's text messages, like, what the hell is going on? So that's that. So the high level is... So we had European Parliament elections last Sunday. It feels like 500 years ago, but it was last Sunday, which happened every 5 years in the EU, and Macron's party got trounced. And the National Rally, which is the sort of main quote-unquote populist right party in France, which used to be known as the National Front, this is the Le Pen party. Most people have heard of Le Pen now. Did really, really well. And, they were expected to win. They were expected to do well. And then Macron was expected to do poorly, but he did very poorly. And the National Rally did very well. There was a map. They were basically ahead in literally every segment of the country except Paris. So that was one thing, but most of people were sort of expecting it. It was it was slightly more than expected, but whatever. And then Macron did something that nobody expected, which is that he called snap elections. So we're going to have legislative elections, so elections for the legislature, for the lower house of parliament, because France has a mixed presidential parliamentary system, because we can never do things in the way other people do it. We have to have our own unique, special French way of doing things. So it's a presidential system, but it's also a parliamentary system. And in parliamentary systems, it's a thing that's sometimes done, which, when there's a political crisis, or, if you lose some election very badly, sometimes the sitting leader will call early elections, either because he believes his situation is not tenable, it's a way of resigning, or as a way of sort of like breaking a crisis, breaking a deadlock, and saying, let the people decide, essentially. But this is fairly common in like Westminster system countries like the UK or Australia, but it's very rare in France. It's happened 3 times in the history of the Fifth Republic. So it's not completely unknown. It's not like illegal or anything, but it is quite rare, and nobody expected him to do this because for the very simple reason, which is that he's projected to lose, which is usually politicians don't. There's a legislative election in the UK, and the Conservatives are doing it at the last possible moment because they're projected to lose heavily. They're not gonna, say, let's have early elections so we can lose faster and have less time in office. That's not usually how it works. This completely surprised everyone, every political observer, myself included. Like, if you'd asked me, 5 minutes before, I would have said, no, that's crazy. That's never going to happen. The first time I saw it, it was people texting me, and I thought it was a joke. Like, literally, it was like, ha, yes, Macron is calling elections. Good one. It's one of the things that happens in movies, and you're like, that doesn't happen in real life, and then it happens in real life. It's like, oh, you're joking, right? Oh, no, you're not joking. Once everybody got over their surprise, the sort of, I don't want to say consensus, but there's this sort of widespread idea that this is like a 300 IQ, 4-dimensional chess move where he wants the populists to win so they can get into government, so they can then become unpopular, because they would have the prime ministership, which is very influential, but it's not the whole thing. And so there would be many ways for Macron, and especially the quote unquote deep state, the civil servants, the bureaucracy and all of that, to obstruct them. And so the idea is this is like a super 300 IQ move where he's going to, essentially like put them in power to sort of sabotage them, make them unpopular, and then his successor, whoever that is, can win the presidential election in 2027, which is more important than the legislative election. So who knows if that's actually true, but it's not as crazy as it sounds, because so this is called cohabitation, when the prime minister and the president are from opposing parties. And usually cohabitation goes bad for the prime minister. It's not crazy to, like, who knows what Macron really wants and really is planning, but it's not crazy to believe that this sort of weird scheme is the plan. Of course, the official version is, he's sort of like daring. He believes that people are voting for the national rally as a protest vote, but when it comes to actually picking who's going to run the country, they're going to like step back from the brink and return him with a majority. That's the official position, which may also be maybe that's, who knows? Nobody knows. So that's basically what happened. So that was phase 1. So phase 2, so he calls an election. The Constitution says that the election has to take place 20 to 40 days after the decision. And he picked the shortest possible time window. And so now all of those parties that weren't expecting to run an election have to run a 2-week national campaign. It's a 2-round election by district. And so it's a form of voting that sort of favors coalitions, that sort of that doesn't favor smaller parties, that favors coalitions. So then the question is, who goes into coalition with who? And so both sides of the political spectrum have sort of imploded or are imploding or whatever, because then the question is, both on the right and on the left, you have a sort of quote-unquote extreme party or populist party, and then you have a sort of mainstream establishment party. And because everybody is pissed off in the country, the quote-unquote populist party is stronger than the establishment party. So the question is, do you sort of join, with the quote unquote extremists or populists, or do you stay on your own? So for the right, the National Party are the populists, the National Rally are the populists, and then there's this smaller party, LR, Les Républicains, which is traditionally it's the party that ruled France for much of the post-war era. It's the party that was founded by de Gaulle. It's the traditional ruling party of France, except now they're very small because half was taken away by Macron and the other half was taken away by the National Rally. So think of, it's like the Paul Ryan wing of the Republican Party. It's the sort of establishment right party. And so the chairman of that party said, look, we have to go into a coalition with the National Rally because, we have no choice. Otherwise, we're going to get creamed. And, they're basically our voters. They're much more moderate now than they were 20 years ago, which is true, blah, blah, blah. And said, all right, let's do a coalition deal. And then all of the S, I don't know if you're allowed to curse here, but all of the S hit the fan.
You can curse.
It was like there was so much crazy stuff going on, like the guys working in the social media team sort of changed the passwords on the Twitter accounts and then left and sort of started tweeting from their bunker that they were the resistance. The chairman who did this coalition was quote unquote expelled by the quote unquote board, except that apparently it had no legal sort of ramifications, and the board was like a Zoom call on which like a reporter was able to access just via the link and vote. Because they used the Zoom voting feature, like that's how they voted to expel him. And so he's now challenging it in courts. There was this entire thing where, he sort of, the chairman sort of locked down the party headquarters, like he locked every door. And then he came back, but he didn't have all of the keys. And so there was this crazy sequence where he was like waving to the crowd from the balconies saying, I have access to almost all the building. Which is what? So, and that's just the right. And then similar thing is happening in the left because the sort of center left party, the socialists, yes, in France, socialist is center left. Did pretty well in these elections, and then you have the far left party, which is LFI, which is basically, and you have a little bit of this in the US too, it's a party that's been pandering very hard to Islamists and sort of Muslim immigrant voters, and especially since the war in Gaza has been, frankly, like, I don't like accusing people of like being bad persons, but pretty overtly anti-Semitic at this point. Like, I mean, like crazy. Like the chairman, like, if something bad happens, he blames like Jewish conspirators. Like it's effed up, like really, like just full on. Because there's like 10% of the French population, and to be clear, these are immigrant origin population. They're not, who buy into that stuff. They find it. So I mean, just the other day, like there was this, white lady who's like a member of parliament for their party saying that Hamas is not a terrorist organization; it's a resistance organization. So all of this stuff. And so the sort of center left party is like, they don't want to get in bed with those people, but at the same time, they're like 10-15% now, and the other guys are like are bigger. I'll take questions now because I've been like,
that's a good
going
overview.
on for however long, but it's a very complicated situation. Everything is moving at 300, kilometers per hour because we have the metric system. I'm sure that by the time this stops, like something else will have, Macron will have appointed, Brigitte Bardot as prime minister or something, like, or, the Eiffel Tower will have turned into cheese. Like, I wouldn't be surprised at this point. So, but I've sort of tried to summarize it at a high level. So I guess now, questions.
Hey, we'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Fast forward to the end of 2024. Think about your goals. What can you do right now to give yourself the best chance of succeeding? If learning a new language is on your list, you absolutely need to check out Babbel. Babbel offers a range of learning tools, self-study app lessons, live classes, and even podcasts, which have always been my favorite way to learn. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove Babbel is better. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. Babbel isn't just a game to kill time and make you feel like you're learning a language. It's not overly academic or rigid either. It's all about learning language for the real world. Babbel stands out because it's designed by real people using a modern conversational teaching approach. It's not always easy, nothing worth doing ever is, but it's straightforward and designed to help you start speaking in just 3 weeks. With Babbel, I was able to brush up on my intermediate Spanish to ramp up for travel to Argentina last year, and was able to set clear goals based on how much time each week I wanted to practice. Join millions of Babbel language learners across all age groups. Here's a special limited time offer for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners, at babbel.com/zen. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/zen, spelled BABBEL.com/zen. Rules and restrictions may apply. If you don't already subscribe to Turpentine's industry-leading newsletters, like our new daily AI newsletter, Emergent Behavior, or Media Empires, you should. But that's not what I'm here to tell you about. The platform we use to power these newsletters is called beehiiv, and it's excellent. First of all, it was started by the same early team who helped build Morning Brew into a $75 million newsletter business, and they built beehiiv to offer that same powerful functionality to anyone sending emails. From essayists to business owners, the platform is beautiful, their text editor is intuitive, and they help you scale your audience with custom growth features. beehiiv has powerful tools to help you monetize your content. You can easily launch paid subscriptions or pursue an advertising model. The beehiiv platform will even connect you to premium brands to sponsor your newsletter. Not only do we use them, but thousands of the top newsletters in the world also use them, like Milk Road, Blockworks, the Lindy newsletter, and so many more. beehiiv's founder hooked up Moment of Zen listeners with a sweet deal. Get 20% off for 3 months with code MOZ. Visit beehiiv.com, that's BEEHIIV.com, to get started.
Zooming out, again, for the 101, for the audience who knows nothing about French politics or European politics, can you, at a high level, can you explain the differences in how France's political system or governance works from the United States, just so people can get a better appreciation for the dynamics at play?
Sure. So the governing system. So we have this constitution, which is, as I said, mixed presidential parliamentary system. So what that means is that you have a president that's directly elected, and then you have a parliament that appoints the government, so the cabinet, so the prime minister and the ministers of foreign affairs, defense, blah blah blah. And so basically, if the president and the legislature, the National Assembly, which would be the equivalent of the House of Commons in Britain or the Bundestag in Germany, so like the lower house of parliament, are of the same party, then everything is fine and there's united government. If the president and the prime minister are of opposite parties, it becomes very complicated because that wasn't really planned by the Constitution. So that's how that works. We were supposed not to have cohabitation anymore because they switched to a 5-year term for both the legislature and the president. So they said, let's just elect everybody at the same time. And, French and, people, if they vote for Smith, then they'll vote for Smith both times. And that way it'll be fine. Or if they wanted Jones instead, they'll vote for Jones twice and it'll be fine. And it worked. It's worked like that since 2002, which is also why Macron's choice to call an early election was so surprising, because we thought we were done with cohabitation. But apparently we're not, which, I've been saying to people for 20 years, so I'm vindicated, but that's just for me. So that's the basic system. So what's at stake in these legislative elections is that whoever gets the majority, if there is a majority, we might also not have a majority, which would be extra fun. Gets to appoint the next prime minister and gets to form the government. And so you would have Macron with very reduced powers. Some people, I've seen some things in the English language press that say, oh, he would be a figurehead, blah, blah, blah. That's not really true. But very reduced powers. And then you would have a prime minister with a say over most domestic policy and the ability to pass bills in the lower house. There's also like a Senate, but the lower house can overrule the Senate. I mean, it gets more complicated, but that's the high level.
Pascal, why is Macron so unpopular? Talk about what's happened to make that the case.
Macron, first of all, Macron is very popular among the 20 to 30% of the country who support him. I mean, this is where it gets more similar to the US, which is in Europe and North America. There's been large segments of the population who have been, in some way, you can say, left behind by globalization, by technological changes, who are now threatened by immigration or feel threatened. And then there's, a quote unquote elite, like a segment at the top of the population who did very well from globalization and technology and all that. And they benefit from immigration because it brings them lower wages and they don't live in places where, immigrants will compete with their children for school spots or whatever. There's this kind of split. And so Macron is the candidate of either people like me, frankly, who went to nice schools and live in Paris and have, jobs that involve typing at a keyboard and looking into a webcam, and of boomer pensioners who basically, have. So France is the only country in the OECD where retirees have a higher average standard of living than working people. We've got the most generous pension system in the world, or close to it anyway. And so these are also people who are doing very well from the status quo, basically. And so that 20 to 30% of the country loves him. And it's a sort of mirror effect that the rest of the country hates him. It's sort of a quirk of the electoral system that he got in to begin with. And so he's been unpopular from day one. So he promised all of these free-market reforms. He didn't really do any. The public finances are an absolute disaster because of COVID debt. He didn't even do the good, quote-unquote good, the basic sort of centrist stuff that you'd expect, a smart, technocratic, the budget is a mess, the debt is a mess. There's a million regulations that he either added or didn't change. The energy policy is a mess. So, the basic situation of the country hasn't changed, and people's energy bills are up, inflation is up, taxes are up. In every country where there's high employment, high taxes, high inflation, high deficit, the guy in charge tends to be unpopular. And I'm not saying he's to blame for all of that. Obviously, the inflation is sort of Europe-wide and even worldwide. It's sort of post-COVID thing. Ukraine, all that. Sure, fine, but it's actually there's kind of no big secret to it.
Hey, we'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Quick math. The less your business spends on operations, on multiple systems, on delivering your product or service, the more margin you have and the more money you keep. But with higher expenses on materials, employees, distribution, and borrowing, everything costs more. So to reduce costs and headaches, smart businesses are graduating to Netsuite by Oracle. Netsuite is the #1 cloud financial system, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one platform. That's one source of truth. With Netsuite, you reduce IT costs because Netsuite lives in the cloud with no hardware required, accessed from anywhere. You cut the cost of maintaining multiple systems and improve efficiency by bringing all your major business processes into one platform, slashing manual tasks and errors. Over 37,000 businesses have graduated to NetSuite, so do the math and make the move. Startup founders and execs running scaling businesses know all too well how easily their systems break down and expenses skyrocket. NetSuite is a proven way to cut costs and boost performance. And by popular demand, NetSuite has extended its one-of-a-kind flexible financing program for a few more weeks. Head to netsuite.com/zen. That's netsuite.com/zen. netsuite.com/zen. Hey all, Erik Torenberg here. I'm hearing more and more that founders want to get profitable and do more with less, especially with engineering. Listen, I love your 30-year-old ex-FANG senior software engineer as much as the next guy, but honestly, I can't afford them anymore. Founders everywhere are trying to turn to global talent, but boy, is it a hassle to do at scale, from sourcing to interviewing to on-the-ground operations and management. That's why I teamed up with Sean Lanahan, who's been building engineering teams in Vietnam at a very high level for over 5 years to help you access global engineering without the headache. Squad, Sean's new company, takes care of sourcing, legal compliance, and local HR for global talent so you don't have to. With teams across Asia and South America, we can cover you no matter which time zone you operate in. Their engineers follow your process and use your tools. They work with React, Next.js, or your favorite front-end frameworks. And on the back end, they're experts at Node, Python, Java, and anything under the sun. Full disclosure, it's going to cost more than the random person you found on Upwork that's doing 2 hours of work per week but billing you for 40. But you'll get premium quality at a fraction of the typical cost. Our engineers are vetted top 1% talent and actually working hard for you every day. Increase your velocity without amping up burn. Head to choosesquad.com and mention Turpentine to skip the waitlist.
So the problem is that France is having, other European countries are having the same problems, basically?
I mean, inflation, yeah, by definition, it's the euro. So, some countries have a little bit less, some countries have a little bit more because they have like a different mix of services versus manufacturing in their economy, but like it's the same currency. So if there's more of it, everybody's going to have inflation. Energy. So energy is the big Macron failure, because if there's one thing, smart people know about France is that we have a bunch of nuclear reactors. And so we're sort of immune from everything, except that when he came in, I'm going to get the specific figures wrong, but when he came in, we were like 85% nuclear, and now we're like 70. And he built a bunch of windmills and solar farms, windmills especially, which are the worst clean technology. Like I know guys who are super bullish on solar. Okay, maybe, but like windmills are terrible. And what we know from Germany is that when you use these green technologies, you really have to buy coal and gas and other fossil fuels, because they're intermittent, and so you need like something that you can fire up real quick when there isn't wind or when there isn't sun, and that's either gas or coal. And so when Putin invaded Ukraine and that pipeline in the North Sea blew up, and there were all these sanctions on Russian gas, the price of gas went like this. It should have not affected the price of electricity in France. If Macron had not decided to increase the share of wind and solar in the French electricity grid, like the French people's electricity bills would have been the same. But my electricity bill doubled, like literally. I'm actually paying twice, because I pay my own electric bill, and then there's I live in a condo, so there's like the building's heating bill, and that's also like I don't think it's 100%. I don't think it's literally double, but it's up by like a significant amount. Like, so it's like it's real. Like people are seeing in their sort of daily life that things that they used to take for granted, and like in France, you used to take sort of super cheap, super reliable electricity for granted. They can no longer take for granted, and now they're expensive.
Yeah, going back to the US, France, and even broader Europe comparisons, you talked about the governance. I'm curious to talk more about sort of the political culture, right? In the US, we've had sort of the the left become the party of college graduates, basically, where there used to be more sort of diversity, but now sort of people who are excited about, Mitt Romney maybe 15 years ago, or 10 years ago, hate Trump, and have sort of like, come to the left, and it's the parties have more coalesced around different different coalitions, i.e. the Democrats being college graduates plus minorities, and the right being perhaps everybody, the white working class, and maybe some others. In France and Europe, it seems like there's also been a more of a populist trend on the right. Talk about how it's similar and different from what's happened in the U.S. in terms of politics.
It's similar in the sense that you have similar dynamics with sort of native white working class and middle class. It's not just like people say, oh, it's the working class. It's not just the working class. It's also a lot of the middle class who are sort of dissatisfied with the status quo. They're not doing well economically. They're also, culturally conservative, maybe not like super ideological, but they're, also not huge fans of like drag queens reading books to children or whatever the latest fad is. And these people feel left behind and they're angry. And so they would be Trump voters in the US. They would be Le Pen voters in France. They would be Brexit voters in the UK. Then you have the sort of successful cognitive elites who are, in the US, they're mostly on the left. In France, they used to be split sort of evenly or mostly on the right with a big percentage on the left. And Macron's like the whole pitch basically was, we're going to create a party that's going to take like the sort of moderate left and moderate right, the sort of Paul Ryan, Mitt Romney element, and the sort of moderate Democrat, Clinton, basically, element, and sort of fuse them in a party, the sort of Mike Bloomberg party. And then so you basically like have three big parties. You have the sort of Paul Ryan Clinton party in the center. You have the sort of Trump party on the right. And then on the left, you have the sort of basically the immigrants party plus, Antifa and sort of like downwardly mobile, pot smoking white people who like majored in sociology. Yeah, it's basically like all three, except that because people are really dissatisfied with Macron, even that base is sort of like, they went back a little bit to the sort of center-left party, which, as I said, did very well in the parliament elections, even though it was completely destroyed. Part of them went to the Greens, who won a lot of like large cities in the municipal elections. I'm sorry. And so that's an example of the political shift. Like when I was, 20 or whatever, most of the big cities in France had conservative mayors because in big cities you have rich people and rich people are on the right. And now they're all on the left, either socialist left or green left. And the green mayors, by the way, the green mayors have brought in migrants, have sort of allowed people to do drugs in open air, which is, if you've ever been to like a mid-sized French city, it is just like the loveliest place in the world. It is where, life is the most pleasant in the world. And they're just destroying that. They're just like, you have entire cities that have completely been transformed in 2 years from just like these incredibly beautiful and pleasant places into these downtown LA, but with better architecture. Like it's or the whatever district in San Francisco or whatever. It's really tragic. To go back to your question, it's a sign of this shift of sort of the cognitive elite people to this sort of like, lifestyle left kind of orientation.
To what extent do you think the sort of more populist right will actually, continue to grow and have some staying power because there's France, but there's also the AfD in Germany, there's also UK. Like, is this just a momentary trend, or do you think this is actually a real shift in where things are going?
So a couple things. So I can only I sort of follow a little bit what goes on in the UK and Germany and all of that, but I'm not an expert. When it comes to France, so every cycle the national rally goes just a little bit better. And so every cycle, everybody's like, "Oh my God, is this it? Are they gonna, is it the fascist takeover? Is it?" And like every time they lose, but every time they're just a little bit closer. So on current trends, eventually, and if you speak privately to sort of elite French people, they know this. Like they, in public, it's like, "Oh, we're going to defend fascism, blah blah blah," and then you speak to them in private, and they're like, "Yeah, it's probably inevitable. We'll just have to prepare. We'll just have to live with it." But the other thing is, if the LR coalition gambit works. So as I said, the sort of mainstream right party whose chairman sort of, I don't want to say defected, because he's still the chairman of his party. It's like his party went into an alliance with the National Rally. But most of the elected officials of that party sort of left the party or created their own dissident party. And so, he's actually taken like a huge political gamble to sort of join the National Rally, and whether that gamble will pay off in the elections is anybody's guess, because if those traditional right, sort of Paul Ryan type right voters sort of join this new coalition, then that's the majority coalition in the US. In France, it's, if you get all, huge chunk of the working class, huge chunk of the middle class, and enough, sort of upper class people, like that's the majority of the country. That's like a coalition that sort of wins most elections. Is it going to work, or are those sort of traditional right voters going to say, "Oh no, I still don't want to go anywhere"? Those sort of like stinky working class guys who don't know how to hold a fork. It's really anybody's guess. Like, we could. I have a friend. I don't know, but I have a friend who's convinced that there's going to be a huge, like this is going to be a wave election. This is going to be a landslide election. That's not what the polls say. The polls, of course, are unclear. The majority is like 287 seats, and they're projected to get between 250 and 300. So who the hell knows? It would be easier if we had like a clear, but of course, no, we don't, because it would be less crazy. So yeah, so the sort of the leader of the mainstream right party took this huge gamble. Is it gonna pay off or not? I honestly don't know, and I don't believe that anybody knows. It really depends on the results of the election. Like, he could get completely creamed, like his candidates. He's coming out with like his own slate of candidates that are going to be essentially like endorsed by both parties. So they're going to run on sort of both tickets, on both the LR and the RN tickets. And so, he's got his own slate of candidates. Are they going to get creamed, or are they going to win? If they're running in like a traditional right district, is it going to be like, oh, the traditional right people are going to vote for him, plus that little extra working class guys, and then you win? Versus, are the traditional right people going to go, oh, he's a dirty fascist now, so I'm going to like hold my nose and vote for the center left or something, or vote for Macron? Like, honestly, I have no idea. I honestly have no idea.
But if you had to guess, and maybe it's we could extrapolate a bit further, like, not just this election, but like the next 5 years, the next 10 years, like, do you have a sense for where you think the country is going politically? Or if you had to pick?
Yeah. If I had to bet, I would bet. I would bet on that sort of traditional and populist coalition being a success and winning winning elections and becoming the government of the country. Because like in reality, the national rally has moderated enough, and the remaining right-wing people who haven't gone off to Macron have sort of radicalized enough that they're the same. It's all theater, it's all symbols, it's all, stuff that average people don't get about how, Le Pen, the father Le Pen, who's been retired for 15 years, said, naughty things in the 70s. It's like, who cares? And, again, in private, even sort of elite type people sort of recognize that whatever is probably going to happen. So long term, it's probably going to happen.
And what will that mean for the country? Like, what when that happens, what will change besides less immigration? Like,
even that is unclear because a lot of immigration is ruled by European law, and so they would have to face off again. They would have to have a fight with the EU before they can sort of regain control of the border. So even that, I mean, it really depends on the people. Like the National Rally's never been in power, and so are they gonna, quote unquote, cuck when they get in power? And sort of like do a Maloney and sort of like, be like sort of don't rock the boat, sort of center right people, or are they going to go full, Bukele style? I honestly don't know. If they fulfill their agenda, then what would happen would be a renaissance for the country because the current sort of socioeconomic system isn't working. We're sort of using, and the US is increasingly that way too. You're sort of using mass immigration as this kind of like performance enhancing drug for the economy because you're sort of like pushing down on the price of wages, which helps business profitability. But the problem is that wages and capital are substitutes, so you're chronically depressing investment. And so, you're helping the economy in the short run by sort of destroying it in the long run. And also, the immigrants that are coming in are sort of lower and lower quality because there's only so many capable people. Even in India, not everybody's a computer engineer. And not all the computer engineers, want to come because increasingly life is nice in India, which is very good for them. Even if you put aside the cultural issues, which are legitimate, purely economically, if you're bringing in immigrants to sort of like juice up your economy, but they cost more in services than they bring in revenue, even economically, it doesn't make any sense. And so you're like a failed .com e-commerce company that's sort of losing money on every unit and making it up with volume. So this sort of immigration-based economic system, I believe, is sort of very perversely, in a very sort of perverse, hard to grasp, but sort of very profound way, extremely damaging to the stuff we like about the economy, which is productivity, which is investment, which is coming up with new things, which is, people wanting to invest in companies for the long run instead of quarter to quarter, all of that stuff. In a very perverse way, when you have this sort of sustained mass immigration that sort of eats away at all of that in preference for stuff that we like in the short run, but we don't really like in the long run, which is, cheap Indian food. Like cheap Indian food is great, but if I have to choose between SpaceX and cheap Indian food, I want SpaceX. And in this weird sort of subtle way, too much cheap Indian food means you don't get so many SpaceXs anymore. I know that none of this will be controversial. Obviously, everybody agrees with me. I certainly believe that when it comes to France, the US is headed in that direction, but it's not there yet. We've sort of been using mass immigration as a sort of way to sort of hide the problems in our economy and sort of avoid the need for reform.
Well, some people would disagree with you. They would say, hey, Elon's an immigrant, and maybe an immigrant will come to France and build the next SpaceX.
Yeah, okay. Like let's welcome in Afrikaners from South Africa. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, The problem is the numbers involved are so large.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's a total non sequitur. Like, Elon Musk built SpaceX, therefore you should let in millions of unvetted people from Africa. Like, what?
Yeah, Elon's 1 in a million. I just need a
Yeah.
million.
And it's like, I mean, my favorite one is the athletes. Like, when Mbappe sort of scores a goal, everybody's like, oh, it's like, okay, like, yes, the world beating athletes can come in. Yes, I agree. All right, let's do a compromise. The top athletes can come in, and everybody else has to go home. Like, you agree with that, don't you? Oh, right? Like, it's never honest. Like, they're they don't care about the Elon Musk. Like, they just want to bring in masses of cheap labor, and they're using totally non sequitur arguments to justify that.
Yeah. Is there a chance of a France version of Brexit?
No, but we don't need to. So the best compromise on this, I guess you can call it a compromise, but I just think it's a smart idea. It was Erik Zemmour, who's this French intellectual who ran for president last time around. He had this basic idea of putting in the constitution that, yes, we're in the EU, we obey European law, that's fine, but when our national interest is directly involved, we get to sort of unilaterally opt out and pass a law that goes against European law. And I think that's a good compromise, because apart from immigration and maybe trade, like, the rest of Europe stuff is, I mean, is it perfect? No, but is it worth sort of throwing the whole thing in the ground? No, it's fine. And France is in a very different position in Europe, vis-a-vis Europe, than the UK, for two reasons. Number one, we have the euro. So if we leave the EU, we have to change our currency, which, probably means, everybody savings going down 10-20% or something like that. Like, switching from one currency to another is not, it's kind of risky. Maybe we'd be better off in the long run, but we'd have 2 or 3 very difficult years. Number one. And number two, France is literally in the middle of Europe. All of the supply chains in Europe depend on, which is an economy that's, it's now a bit smaller than the US, but it's still a very large economy. They depend on the assumption that you have no barriers for goods between, Madrid and Berlin, or Antwerp and Milan, or whatever. It would just completely disrupt the European economy in a way. The euro probably wouldn't exist because it's the second biggest economy in Europe. So if the country in the middle sort of leaves the euro, can the euro still exist? I mean, it would be extremely disruptive, and really, France doesn't need to leave the EU. It just needs to opt out of a handful of crazy laws. And they can just say, yes, we're gonna opt out of these laws. Yes, Brussels, you don't like it, you think it's illegal. So if you want to, it's basically like a brinksmanship. It's a bluff. It's like saying, okay, well, you can kick us out of the club if you want to, but that would mean destroying the EU. So do you want that? And I actually think it's very, very smart and very healthy, because other countries would start doing it, and then you would get to a more healthy system where the sort of European law is what we can get a consensus on, versus what's decided by this sort of technocratic unelected body. It's good to have a free trade area for Europe. You know what I mean? There's a bunch of EU stuff that's good. It's just that there's this sort of technocratic sort of monster in the middle of it that's sort of accrued, power bit by bit, like small piece by small piece for 40 years. And now we sort of don't know what to do with it. And it's like, take something like GDPR, is it stupid? Yes. Is it worth destroying the EU over and sort of like throwing the entire region into economic chaos for however many years? No. You know what I mean?
You believe in the EU. You think that the EU should continue to exist in its current form over the next couple decades at least?
Well, not in a modified form where countries can essentially like have a veto power.
Got it.
And so I think if we had that, it would sort of evolve over time into something a lot more conducive to sort of national democracy and a lot less sort of bureaucratic, technocratic, but without the huge chaotic thing of breaking up this sort of huge economy where, again, like the countries have an interest in sharing trade, in having economic cooperation, and all of that. Like there's like 70% or 80% of stuff that the EU does that I have no problem with and that nobody else has any problem with. You know what I mean?
Yeah, makes sense. Gearing towards the hour here, gearing towards closing, Is there anything we haven't covered that you think we should, or what else should we leave our audience with?
Buy short-dated puts and long-dated calls on the CAC 40. This is not financial advice. In fact, don't do this. Is this a meme stock podcast? I'm at the wrong podcast. I thought I was doing a meme investing podcast.
It wouldn't be the first time people have lost money listening to us.
I hope so. Like if people are not, destroying their financial situation because of your advice, then what's the point?
Exactly. What are we doing?
No, I mean I'm bullish. I was sort of joking with the put call thing, but the underlying thing is that I really am optimistic about my country over the long term. Because the sort of young people here are, very smart. That's always been true, but sort of and well educated and all of that, but also like increasingly, for lack of a better word, based and sort of very sharp and lacking the illusions of sort of previous generations about how the system's just going to go on forever and you can just just going to get a civil service job after graduation or just going to get a job at a big company that are much more entrepreneurial, and so like the like American Zoomers terrify me, honestly, but French Zoomers impress me very frequently. So yeah, I guess if I had to end on this, I am bullish France over the long run. Absolutely. And I'm putting my money where my mouth is because I live here, even though I could be living and working in the US. Full disclosure.
Yeah. Well, that's a great place to wrap. Pascal, thanks for coming on and sharing your knowledge
This was a lot of fun.
And give a plug to another plug to the company as well, so people can follow it.
My company is called Sphere Media, and our website is called policysphere.com. If you're into U.S. policy at a sort of frighteningly nerdy level, then you should sign up for our newsletter. And if not, you're not in my target audience. And so, good luck to you.
Excellent. And Pascal, we'll have to have you back at some point with Antonio and Dan Romero, who have been having a what they call the Euro-poor debate. Antonio is a big, his kids just moved to Europe, and so he's big, bullish on it, and Dan loves to rip on it. So we should have a.
I bought an air conditioner this year, so I'm joining the first world.
So we should have a native way in. Awesome. Okay, Pascal, to be continued. Talk soon.
Ciao.
Hey everyone, Erik here. At Turpentine, we're building the first media outlet for tech people by tech people. We're the network behind the show you're listening to right now. We have a slate of hit shows across a range of topics and industries, from our AI and investing cluster of podcasts to shows that drive the conversation in tech with the most interesting thinkers, founders, investors, and influencers, like Econ 102 with Noah Smith. We're launching new shows every week, and we're looking for industry-leading sponsors. If you think that might be you and your company, email me at ericaturpentine.co. That's ERIK at turpentine.co, and let's partner together.